computer. Okay, we're recording now. Hi, my name is Danielle Blunt. I am a New York City-based dominatrix, and I am here with Miss Lori Diletto. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I am also a New York City-based dominatrix. I'm also a pro switch and a BDSM educator. And I'm sitting in an apartment of a friend who's like halfway moved out because he's like expected to be evicted after this whole nightmare is over. And he was just like, if you just want to come and like shoot a bunch of clips in my apartment, you can do that. So I'm
You're
just
in your
hanging out in like
studio.
this half abandoned, like ancient. I have the window open because it's one of those apartments where the radiator starts going at like 1,000 degrees.
I'm
So
surprised you
yeah,
could
I'm
even
just
touch it in New York
oh,
City.
it's this one has been off for a little while. The one in the other room is like a nightmare though. So I'm trying to like balance the yeah. Anyway, so hey,
Hey,
hello.
so we both actually we're gonna talk about some of the custom like femdom and BDSM clips that we've been making. And I don't know if you can tell, but with our makeup and our getup, we've both just finished shooting a custom. Um, I would love to hear a little bit about um, like when you started making fetish clips and sort of what the I know we were both primarily in-person workers, so like what that transition to online work during the pandemic has looked like for you.
Yeah. So this has been something I never anticipated doing because I don't show my full face. I would say that pro switching is not a career for me so much as it's a job that is helping me achieve my other career goals. So I have to be careful about being too recognizable. Um, and so I never intended to like put my face out there online. But then the pandemic happened and we weren't left with a ton of options. So I guess first I started doing just like clips for existing like real life clients that I had. And then I was like, all right, it seems like this is going to go on for a little while, this pandemic, so I should probably figure out a way to do this sustainably, to like keep my risk somewhat low. It's like, if someone knows me well and they see me right now, like they're gonna know it's me, but hopefully like this obscures enough to flummox like facial recognition technology. And it's like if I do a job interview, if someone happens to see this video, like they're probably not going to remember and put two and two together. So like I felt comfortable enough where I was like, okay, I can do this and I can get creative and I can wear like, I did some doctor clips where I'm wearing like the medical mask.
Perfect for the
And
pandemic.
yeah. And so it's been evolving over time. And I also like had a lot of questions of like, how do I translate what I do in person for the camera? And how do I decided to look at it more as marketing than as like a venture in and of itself. Cause I'm not a very visual person. I'm more verbal and I'm more like action oriented. So I learned all the basics, but this wasn't something that I was like, all right, this is what I want to put like my heart and soul into. So instead I'm just like, I'm going to use it as a medium to show what I do so that when this does eventually come to an end, um, hopefully some of that can translate back into real life. And so I decided to focus on things that I really enjoy doing in session, which is mostly for me. I'm more about the psychology of BDSM, and so
Mm.
I'm really into like elaborate role play scenarios, and I'm also into like very fetishy kind of strict fetish stuff. So I decided to focus on those two things, and then yeah, I wound up going down some weird like internet holes because of that.
I mean, fetish clips can go down some interesting paths for
Yes.
sure. Especially like if you're open and interested in what people's like deepest perversions really are.
Oh, and I like that stuff fascinates me. I love like even if it's not something that like because fetishes are very particular and they're very wide ranging and like obviously I'm not going to be personally aroused by all of them. But I like being able to understand enough to appreciate what is arousing about something and to try to tap into that. Like, that is really, it's so fascinating to me, and I love it. And I love learning about these more like esoteric fetishes.
Yeah, I think there's something that's really interesting for me when it's not like I'm asked to make a custom or to do a session for something that's not my fetish. I think that seeing people's arousal is really arousing for me. So I'm thinking right now, I had this Adam's apple fetishist. It was like an
Wow.
Adam who wanted to worship my Adam's apple. And I was like, I am
Okay.
so interested in like in
Yeah.
this. Tell me everything. And like it wound up in a session where like I wound up getting turned on just because this person, like the energy that was being shared in the session, where it was like, it's never something that I would have thought about in a sexual
Right.
way. And now sometimes I like see my Adam's apple and I'm like, cool. I got paid for that.
So I talk about like bespoke BDSM as like my tagline, because for me it's always been very much about like, and I know this isn't like the popular line, like you're not supposed to be like, oh, as the mistress, you're not supposed to be like, I want to do whatever you want to do. But like, I really, as long as I can get into that psychological space of being the one who's dominant, like it doesn't really matter to me what the particulars are, you know. I had one guy who wanted me to be a farmer and he was the rabbit, and I was just like, okay, that makes sense to me, like in terms of domination, I can get into that. And it keeps things like fresh and interesting. So yeah, it's like as long as that's what you're into and I'm getting that reaction out of you, the
Mm-hmm.
particulars of how I get there like don't so much matter to me. It is harder. One of the things that is harder about virtual work, especially if you're doing just clips, is that you don't have that same
Yeah.
kind of feedback.
I feel this
Um,
I feel similarly about the like I think of like when someone's filling out my contact form, I don't think of it like them like topping from the bottom. I'm like, no, you're merely giving me the tools to get into your psyche so that I can
yes,
like fuck around.
yes,
And like that, so it really, I just really think of people's like interest or fetish as a tool of getting into their head. And there's so many different ways to do that. And like I love the farmer and the bunny. Hot. I
right. It's
consider
like
being
it's
super.
the variety that
Yeah.
keeps this fun for me. Like there are like certain things that I go back to again and again, both in my professional life and my personal life. But I don't want to do the same thing all the time, you know?
Right.
So,
I feel like sometimes there are certain things or like keywords in like BDSM scenes that really work for people and they feel hesitant to share what those are because it feels like it's topping from the bottom. And I'm like, if there is like a series of words that like puts you immediately into like this mush like subspace, fucking give it to me because I'm going to use it.
yes, it makes things easier for both of us. I try not to complain about this too. I complain too much on Twitter, which I think is just a habit of like how I use Twitter in my civilian life. So I'm trying not to do this as much. But one of the complaints I always have is every time I get one of those session requests, it's like, I'll do whatever you want. I'm like, you're just making my life harder when you say that to me. Because like, I mean, like, first of all, it just tells me that you're probably not good at communication. So that's not a good first impression.
Mhm.
But then second of all, like it usually ends up being a guessing game. And it's like, okay, I most of the times when I've tried to do whatever I want, it'll be like, oh well, you know, I mean, yeah, that's okay. Okay, yeah, yes, mistress. And I'm like, well, this isn't fun for me if you're not into it, you know, and like, and as a switch, like I feel like I have a particular perspective on this because when I'm bottoming, like my likes and limits are still important. Like I'm not, I feel like a lot of, maybe not a lot, but some submissives have sort of blurred the line between the fantasy of being degraded and lesser than and like actually thinking that way about themselves,
Mhm.
which obviously doesn't, you know, work for me as a switch. So I'm like, you know, your desires are valid and important, and the hot part is where we find where those overlap, you
Yeah,
know,
finding
and
that
it's
chemistry and
not
connection.
it's not real control for me. Like, yeah, I can force you to do things you don't want to do, but like that's just not very interesting or appealing to me, you know? I want you to want to do this for me.
I
So
think,
help me help you.
yeah, help me help you.
Yeah.
I remember one scene like this. It wound up turning into an interrogation scene because I was like, you know the words that you want to hear, and you're not fucking telling me. I want to hear you say exactly what sentence you want to hear come from my mouth because I want that power. And it was just it turned into a great scene because he fucking gave me what I wanted.
Good.
But I think maybe this is like a nice segue into some of the more esoteric clips that I think both of us have been filming. I've found like a lot of joy in unpacking certain kinks, specifically like in humiliation clips and small penis humiliation clips and like sissification fantasies and gender play.
Oh yeah.
And I've been having like a lot of
Those
fun.
are some complicated ones.
Yeah, being like, well, actually, what do you find humiliating about this? Like, if you're wearing panties, they're the same panties that I'm wearing, should I feel humiliated too? And really just like breaking it down for people and like making them say what they want is so fun for me. And it's a unique way of translating it into clips when you don't necessarily have that other person's energy to feed off of. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about like what that's been like for you.
So I just want to comment for like, I don't know if you've seen this, but I have a series of clips called Fetish Deconstruction, which I did like purely on a whim just because I was bored one day and I was like, I want to talk about like how annoying like some of the small penis humiliation guys are. Like I just want to complain about this. So I turned it into like, I'm gonna humiliate you for wanting to be humiliated.
And I have a clip like that too.
Yeah.
Show them side by side.
It was super fun and I did not expect it to sell at all. But it did really well. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Because I drew on a lot of my academic work on gender and like sexuality and the intersect. Like I talked about like, you know, the myth of the big black penis and like all of this in a fetish clip. And I'm like, no one's gonna like be into this. And they were so into it. I think like there is a hunger for people to understand where these fetishes come from. And so I did a whole series about like different fetishes that are often problematic but not always problematic. And I think what it usually comes down to is like how well you understand where this is coming from and how well you can distinguish between like a fantasy and your reality, you know? So like, do you really believe about yourself that you're worth less because your penis is small? Like probably not. And I turned it into a humiliation by being like, oh, well, you know, if you were rich and you were handsome and you were funny and I liked being around you, do you really think I'd give a shit if your dick was small? No, you're just
it's just who you are as a person.
Right. But it's like, of course it's hot to play with as long as you understand that. And so like, I love helping people understand these things and also understanding it myself. And like, the more esoteric these fetishes are, it's like, I haven't necessarily thought about it. And so I love being able to get nerdy about it.
Yeah. I remember one of my like small penis humiliation clips culminating in like, I think it was either a custom or a session with someone who was so obsessed with the fact that they had a small penis, which it's very interesting because I would not like quantify everyone who comes to me for small penis humiliation as actually having a small penis. It's like
most of them are average.
I know. Yeah. The majority of penises are average size based on science. But he was just so obsessed with it. And he's like, oh, like, this is why, like, I can't get a girl. This is why I can't please a woman. And I like looked at him. No, this wasn't an in-person session. I looked at him in the face and I was like, the reason that you can't get a girl is because you're more obsessed with the size of your dick than actually pleasing a woman. And I was like, you would rather obsess about this than like learn how to be a useful partner. And it was just like, that's more interesting to me.
It really is. So like with these, so I did want to do some fetish stuff, but I was mostly planning on doing like the popular fetishes, you know, like feet and pantyhose and stuff like that. And then I sat down, I did my research, I looked at all of the categories on Clips for Sale, and there are hundreds of fucking categories. And I did two lists. I did one of like most popular fetishes, and I did one of least popular fetishes. And like there's kind of like two tactics you could take as a businesswoman, and it's like you can compete with like 10,000 other people making foot fetish clips, and you're going to make some sales because there's a lot of people buying, but there's also a lot of people selling. Or you can go to these categories. One of the ones that stuck out to me, because like I was dating someone at the time who had a swimming pool, was the swim cap category. And it's like, I didn't know that was a thing, but it's latex, it's tight, like I guess I get it. And you know, there's maybe like, I don't know, 35 clips in the entire category, but
Right.
you know, if the category exists, someone asked for it. So I was like, let me just try doing that and see what happens. And like, I wouldn't say it was a huge seller, obviously, but people bought it because there's not a ton of competition. So I started getting more into those because like it was really interesting for me to think about the ways that these things can be arousing, and to try to tap into that, and to like occasionally do some research of like watching other clips and trying to see what they focus on. And so like that appeals to me. And one of the things I ended up doing, again, kind of just as a lark, just to see how it went, was giantess stuff. Um, and I ended up doing really well. And so I'm like, okay, I'll do some more of that. And then like the more I did, the more requests I would get. And so I never thought that I would be a giantess specialist, but I have sort of just fallen into that role. And I love it because like giantess stuff is so like, in some ways it's so simple, right? It's like a child's understanding of power.
Yeah.
It's literally just like, oh, I am tiny and you are super big. And like, that's the most literal power differential there is. Um, and so like to understand the ways that like people come to eroticize that, and like, you know, maybe you're reading Jack and the Beanstalk as a kid, like this, I can't wait to have kids because like I'm just gonna know, I'm gonna be like, oh god, this is gonna give them a weird fetish, you know, like the things that people
You're
tell
just gonna
you,
like
they're like, I
clock
have,
it while it's happening.
yeah,
Write
the
it in the
like
baby book.
people, and you can't prevent these things, like there's someone's gonna latch onto something, you know. um and you know, people being like, yeah, I was like 4 years old and reading Jack and the Beanstalk, and like somehow that just lodged somewhere in their brain, and here we are like 30 years later, and I'm making you a clip of me stepping on a little man, like
Yeah,
that's
and you tap into like those desires of powerlessness and power in a like a really tangible, concrete way that is like extremely popular.
yeah. And I think part of it might just be Clips for Sale. When I was looking at platforms, the main thing I considered, because like I retired for a few years and then came back. And so like I was trying to rebuild my client base again. And so I was looking like, okay, I just want the most popular platforms so that I can find new clients. So Clips for Sale is like a giant. Sorry. Like they've been around forever. And so I think they're really popular with certain communities in ways that I had not been aware of. But I think especially like in the giantess and the shrinking communities, which are like distinct but
And more.
overlapping. And for I now get a lot of vor requests as well. Yeah, I think it's really big in those like online spheres. So they definitely, like those clips, I post them on OnlyFans as well, and I think the people on OnlyFans are just kind of like, what, you know, like, so it really depends on the platform too,
Yeah.
who your
Or
audience is.
know your audience.
Yeah.
But also I feel like even like I probably watched more giantess porn and like giantess fetish clips than I have made them. And I'm like, I can like totally see this, like it's not my fetish, but I can see it being super hot. Like
Yeah.
especially as something that translates power through a screen and through a clip in a way that you might not be able to feel as like with camera angles, I think can almost be more effective via a screen than an in-person session. So I think that that's something that translates really well to like a fetish femdom clip.
That's a really good point. Yeah, thinking about the things that work on the screen versus real life is something like I still consider. Um, because I love doing stuff with like sensation play, and how do you really can't translate a lot of that. But I went to an online webinar with Simone Justice had this webinar on translating in-person session dynamics to like phone stuff. And I started doing phone stuff as well. So I was really curious and I signed up for that. And she talked about, like painting a scene for people with your words, um, which really appeals to me because I'm a verbal person. And so I was thinking about ways to do that, while I'm talking in clips. And I do a lot of talking in my clips to try to approximate some of those in-person dynamics. And also just for other people who are maybe more verbal than they are visual. Although, it helps to like have my tits out too while I'm doing it. So
Visual. Talking about
yeah.
your tits while they're there. I think that's interesting. I feel like my background in yoga and meditation has sort of made adapting to online work and making more fetish clips and femdom clips a little bit easier because of like my experience with visualization. I think lends itself really well to translating like in-person sensations to online dynamics. And I'm also so often so verbal in in-person sessions that I take that. But when I first started filming clips, it was actually my ex-partner who would film them, and he would be jerking off aligned with like what I was saying. So I was actually
that helps.
it was very helpful. I would actually get like physical feedback as well as like cues from him, which I think like really helps me with the pacing, so that like even when that person isn't there shooting, I often like conjure up a partner of who I would be talking to, or if I'm filming a custom for someone, like I kind of like conjure them up in my brain and like pretend that I'm doing an in-person session with them.
Yeah, I do that as well. I think like probably most of us do. I think that's like the main trick we use is to just pretend like we're talking to that. I do a lot of POV stuff, so like yeah, just pretend like the person is here and I'm talking to them. I was a theater kid though, so I do like kind of, which I think is one of the things that appeals to me like about this work in particular, is that it's very theatrical, even when you're only performing for an audience of one, or even if you're not, even if you're like you're like me, where you're in this apartment by yourself and you set up a little, like I have a curtain and a black curtain and some lights, and like you're just like, all right, this is my stage and I'm not performing for anyone at the moment. You can imagine the eventual audience.
Right.
And
Interesting.
yeah, so I do like that aspect.
No, I like hate playing in public. I've been like asked multiple times to do like performances, and I'm like, oh, I'm like, that's way too hard for me because there's so many other, it doesn't feel like a performance for me, more so than like maybe for one person. Like it's not like for other people to see, and then there's so many other stimuli that I'm taking in that I'm like, this feels like too much.
I think this overlaps with like my personal interest in role play, because I would say that like the majority of my interests at this point are have some element of role play to them. I just love, and I'm usually like, I feel like there's some misconceptions about role play where people think that like you need to have really good acting skills, and you don't. You just need to be able to get out of your head for a little bit, which I think is helpful for a lot of people when they're doing BDSM, especially for the first few times. So like I like to pick just like archetypes of like, I'm not playing a character named like Joni or something. It's just like, okay, I'm a secretary. What would I be like as a secretary? And just go with that. And a lot of it is about the improv with your partner. And so getting really in tune with them. And so as long as you can get out of your head and pay attention to the other person, I think role play works really well.
It's interesting that you frame it like that, because I think like we were talking about like powerlessness and power, there's something about when you were talking about like tapping into a role or an archetype that frees you, I'm thinking of sort of like how people express a similar feeling through bondage, that like being confined or constrained allows their brain to like relax and like be more sexual. And the way you were sort of describing role play, I don't think of it necessarily like as bondage, but it is sort of like a confinement of like, you know what to do, which if like might be a path to help you get out of your head. And I feel like I used to be the person who was like, this isn't play, like this is real. Whatever's happening here is like authentic and real. And was when I was like on like a more spiritual path. And it wasn't until I had a submissive who was an actress who was explaining how similar a lot of the things that she would do in acting school were to the things that we would do in sessions, and about how it's like a matter of like invoking an archetype or invoking a feeling, and like that in and of itself is like is and can be very real.
The feeling is real, right?
Yes. And so it's a matter of tapping into that feeling or archetype that play can become real. And yeah, like my thought about it has changed a lot. And because of that change, like role play has gotten a lot more fun for me. But it was, for me, it's always something that like kind of shifts very fluidly. Like I can go from mommy to babysitter to secretary to like your boss, and just like moving through all of these different dynamics and with a few of the people that I play with.
Yeah. I think there's also like something to be said for the therapeutic aspects of role play. And I know we've both talked about like how BDSM is not therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And I think about, so I'm in, for the viewers that don't know, I'm in grad school for social work and I've taken some clinical classes, and there's often role play involved in those classes of, you know, how would you get through this scenario with a client. And also using role play in your therapy practice with clients, and understanding like both the similarities and the differences between that and like a BDSM role play. But it's kind of like the obviously the ways you do it are different. You're not going to like have sex with your therapy clients, you're not going to tell them to like strip down and bend over, but the kind of like the goal is the same, as like we want to help you tap into certain emotions that maybe you are cutting yourself off from, or maybe we want to help you. Oftentimes therapeutic role play will be used to help people prepare for some sort of confrontation, like, okay, I want to confront my parents about this, I want to talk to my wife about this, and be like, okay, you know, let's pretend that I'm the wife and you're going to talk to me about it, and let's see how it goes. So to prepare people for something and to help them explore those emotions. And I feel like that's true in a BDSM context as well.
Yeah,
I love that overlap.
and there's something about both of those instances that you describe of a somatic like embodiment of different like personas or roles. And I've read a lot of I believe his name is William Cornell, who writes a lot about somatic therapy, and a lot of what he's talking about in these workshops is very similar to what's happening in a role play session, just that it's not necessarily sexual. And there's also like the stepping into someone else's role so that you can like tap into what they're feeling, or like that transference is at play. I also feel like transference and counter transference within a BDSM scene are super present.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like one thing that I've learned from my background in psychology, and like I'm also totally in team like BDSM can be therapeutic and cathartic, but it's not therapy. And if you want it to be that, you should go see a therapist to like complement whatever
to work through that. Yeah.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought with my little asterisk, but I think that Oh, transference was the path that we were on. Okay, I'm gonna like.
Yes.
There's something about transference and countertransference. Like, I don't know if you want to help me out with this definition here, but like the idea that like when that like you can't detach yourself from your own personal roles and attachments, and that projection and counter projection play a huge role in the relationship between a patient and a therapist. And I think that that is so true in all sex work dynamics, especially in ones that involve a power dynamic. And the thing that like we don't get trained, I mean, we have some training in it because of our academic background, but like there's not that training of like, oh,
right, there's no formal BDSM doctorate degree.
your master's in BDSM.
My mistresses of BDSM.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really until studying psychology that I really was able to understand like how transference was playing a role in my work, and like how to sort of play with the projections that people were putting on me and make sure that like I was like able to be better at containing
Oh, I like that.
what I was projecting on other people. But that also feels very much like role play related and like containing the roles.
Yeah. Thinking about, I feel like, you know, like sex workers and dominatrixes in particular, like we get training, but unlike a profession, and I use that term as like something that is, you know, standardized, regulated, there's like a governing body, there's like accreditation and all that shit. The difference is like it's informal, and the ways that we pass these on to each other, you know, it's a lot more about community and solidarity and like mentoring and just like helping the next girl stay safe and do well and make money, which I think is really beautiful. And but it's kind of this haphazard process of learning of like, for me, when I think about transference and countertransference in like a sex work context, and like I don't think I've ever used those words in that context, but I do think it applies to some extent. I think about like making sure like I'm not projecting my own emotional needs in an inappropriate way, which is also something you have to do as a therapist. You know, it's like it's not about me and my emotional needs. I am here to hold space for you and your needs right now, which I feel like is a lot of what sex workers do as well. And I feel like we learn that like by trial and error of like every sex worker has that story of like, oh, that one time that I got too close to a client and then it ruined our client relationship.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, just even just having language from another industry to describe when someone's like projecting something onto me just helps me better understand it and be able to like contain it in a vessel, and also to be like, I'm not a therapist.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
I feel like it does happen a lot in like DS dynamics too, especially like when there's like this like deification of the dom who can do no wrong, and like all of a sudden you have to cancel a session because you're sick, but doms and goddesses don't get sick, so you've then like cracked this like projection that they have of you up on this pedestal, and like understanding like how like different things can break the frame for people, and like what that does for those dynamics.
Yeah, I talked about that in one of my clips as well, of like the fetish deconstruction series. I did one on like female supremacy and this idea of you know, what happens if you just sort of reverse the gender hierarchy and put women at the top. And I talk about this idea of like there's two ways to dehumanize someone, right? It's to either make them less than human, or it's to make them more than human. It's like, you're an infallible goddess, and it's like, well, then that means I'm not a person who makes mistakes and learns from them, and that's a problem for both of us, you know. Of again, appreciating the fantasy of that and what the fantasy does and draws on, and like wanting to play with the fantasy, but also being like, oh, it's not a really good basis for like your personal politics of like, women are goddesses. It's like, no, we're people, and we're learning. And it's also for your own safety that if a dominatrix like very seriously thinks that she can't fuck up,
Yeah.
that's dangerous. You don't want to play with that person. You want someone who can be like, oh, hey, you know what, my bad, I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen again, let's work around it. So I like to point out to subs, like, when I fuck something up, just to like remind them of like, we're two people doing this and having fun and like learning. And like, I know that's not everyone's dynamic, which is totally fine, but like, I
I've also
like to just be like, oh, that didn't go as planned.
yeah, I think it's very humanizing, and also like, which is helpful in the maintenance of relationships where you are being like fetishized to a certain extent. I've
Yeah.
also started including some of that in my like pre-scene negotiation of like, do you feel comfortable like stopping something if it goes wrong, or like when something goes wrong, like not
Yeah.
if, like, do we have like the skills and the tools to like figure that out? That's oftentimes more for like more personal play, but I do it to some extent as well in my professional practice, because I think that going into a scene and like going into a therapy session, assuming that like your therapist isn't going to make mistakes,
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
setting you up for failure. And like any relationship, therapeutic, personal, like a relationship with a sex worker, if you go into that situation with the expectation of everything will go great, that is just about never the case when you're interacting in like an intersubjective experience with another person who literally cannot read your mind.
And I try to tell people, like, I tend to market myself towards people who are new to BDSM and kind of nervous about it, because like I feel I'm pretty good at putting people at ease. And what I tell them if they've never really done this before is that like expect it to take like 3 sessions before we get into that space that you fantasize about. Like the first one is about me getting to know you and understand your reactions, because everybody, it's like, okay, I like light corporal. That means something different to literally everyone. So I need to figure out what that means for you and not just throw you in at the deep end, because probably you wouldn't come back. And also, I don't really think that's ethical. So like the first time is me getting to know your desires and possibly you getting to know them too. The second time we're like really incorporating that. And then the third time is like we get into the flow. And I think that's also true for therapy, where like you have to see a therapist a couple times first to like establish that rapport before you really feel comfortable like coming to them with your issues.
Yeah, and to I think it's through that regularity of seeing someone too. I think this is why I've never really appealed to hobbyists, because I so like explicitly say on my website, like, I have no interest in seeing you if your only interest is to see me once. Like, I don't care if it winds up that way. Like, if we don't gel, that's fine. And I say similar things to people, which is like, I'm really good at finding chemistry with people. And I think like I can find chemistry with most people, but it's a matter of finding that chemistry. And it takes
Yeah.
time, especially if you're working with people who have repressed desires, or if you're working with newbies who like haven't had experience putting the things that they've been fantasizing about into their bodies. It can look really different than like what they've spent
Yeah.
30, 60 years fantasizing about. And then
Mm-hmm.
realizing like, oh, I actually can't even kneel on my knees when I'm like this scene.
I actually enjoy doing one-off sessions sometimes with people who like their whole thing is like, I just want variety and I want to see different doms approach to the same thing. Usually they know exactly what they're looking for, which I really appreciate, and they're able to like communicate that well. And I've had a couple of those one-off sessions that have gone really well, because it's like the guy just says like exactly what he's looking for. We do it once, he's really into it, it worked for him, it worked for me, and then he's like, thank you, that's what I needed, I got what I needed, now I'm gonna try the whole experience all over again. And I'm like, that's cool, that's great. But yeah, on the other hand, it's also really nice, especially for someone like me who's more into the psychological aspects of developing that over time and watching how it evolves.
I think I could differentiate too between like I think where I like have a hard time in my personal, like professional practice is when people are using like language of like female supremacy and obsession and like devotion in a way where it's very clear that it's just a copy and paste one-off message.
Oh, no,
I think for like
no.
fetishes and certain role play scenes, I'm like definitely more into seeing people who like want variety. And you're right, you're totally right. Like sometimes people like really know what works for them and know what they want, and you can get into that flow with them really fast. But I think for the more like psychological scenes, or for people who do want to explore like actual DS dynamics, it really just doesn't work for me in a one-off scene. It like leaves me feeling kind of shitty.
Yeah. And I think as a switch, I probably don't attract those same kinds of people that um women who are strictly doms do. Like they, you know, because they have this idea that like, oh well, if you're submissive then you're less than, and so if you're switch then I don't know, what does it make me, like 50% pathetic? Like I'm not really sure
Your new
how that would play
tagline.
out. Yeah. um but I would say that most of my regulars over the years are other switches, which I love. Because so I started out and I don't talk about this a lot, but like I started out my personal life as a sub and thought that that was only what I was into, until I started to realize that like I was one of those, I don't want to call myself a brat because I'm not always a brat, but sometimes I can be kind of bratty. And I realized that what was really appealing to me was like the power dynamic and playing with that power dynamic and challenging that power dynamic. And I started doing that from the bottom, but then I started like experimenting with doing it from the top as well. And I started working as a dominatrix and spent more time doing it that way. Um, and now it's like I understand the appeal of both sides. And I like finding other people who have that similar mindset. Um, and so like the last in-person session I did, which like I'm not doing a ton these days, but the last one I did was a switch role play tickle scene, where he was a TSA officer and I was like smuggling drugs. I got little baggies and filled them with flour and like hid them on my body. And you know, he strip searched me and whatever, and then like it's like, oh, I won't report you if you let me tie you up and tickle you. I'm like, okay. But then I escaped and I turned the tables on him. And like the most exciting part for me is always that moment of the like, and I know not everyone switches this way. I don't always, but it really appeals to me to have that moment of where the tables turn. Like that to me is just super erotic. But anyway, yeah, I think that probably changes the kinds of people who approach me. So like I don't get those kinds of annoying guys, but like I get other kinds of annoying guys. But then I get the cool ones too, like the guy who wants to do like a TSA tickle roleplay. I'm like, that's amazing. I love this. Like
I think also what I love about working as a dom is that like I get this chance to like step into someone else's fantasy that they have like been creating in their head for whoever knows how long. And like I feel like I get to have a bunch of experiences that I wouldn't necessarily have had if like there wasn't this container for it. Like for you, that like TSA tickle switch scene. And like I can think of I was talking with one of my regulars about how much I appreciate him because he's such like a gear heavy player, and I'm very much like a psychological and sensation player. And when we come together for sessions, like he brings all of this like really amazing gear that I just like would never have
I love those guys
interacted with. Yeah. And like is very generous and like is gifting me a latex back bed for the holidays. And like,
you're getting it. Are you doing the clear or are you doing the black?
Oh my god, I still don't know. I think I'm just gonna let you. What do you think?
Okay. I mean, so I don't do a ton of like mummification stuff, but I would say that the thing that appeals to me, about it personally is like to be able to watch it. Like
Mm.
the idea of having a transparent back bed is super appealing to me. But other
So
people are going to be
objectifying.
more into the objectification aspect. So like, yeah, I don't know. I could,
I think I'm gonna
me
go with the
personally,
like,
I would do clear.
I think
But
I might do
if
the black one because I think I've been watching, the pandemic has me like fetishizing back beds because I'm like, how much distance can we have between us so that it's safe? And it's been
oh yeah,
very objectifying. I'm super interested in what new fetishes are going to come out of the pandemic. If you have any
I'm
insight.
already loving it. I think it was Mistress Odette who posted something like either today or yesterday of her in like this clear yellow hazmat suit, and I was just like, oh my god, like that, I'm into this now. Like this is the thing I'm into. Like we're just discovering new things to be into to deal with our. I like to like summarize BDSM, especially for people who are skeptical, as like this is a way that we cope with our fears. We sexualize them in order to cope with them. You know, just like some people are into haunted houses and some people are into roller coasters. Some people are into like weird psychosexual role plays, you know, like it's fine as long as you're just be safe. But I think, yeah, we're gonna sexualize a lot of this stuff as a way to deal, and like not necessarily consciously. I mean, fetishes are, people don't really, I know we like to talk sometimes about like implanting fetishes and stuff, but I think for the most part, people are just into what they're into. Um, and so as a dominatrix, my thing is to like find out how your particular thing appeals to me and how I can manipulate it. And I want to see how that plays out with shit like masks and gloves and like,
Can you imagine
yeah,
holding
what's it?
someone's hand after this who's not in your pod?
I'm especially like, and like, it's beautiful. I think that human sexuality is this creative and diverse. But yeah, I'm especially interested to see what happens like 30 years from now when like the children who like, not to like sexualize children, but this is how sexuality develops is from a young age you latch onto certain things and it forms these weird connections in your brain, and like to see how that's going to play out like 30 years from now when like someone's client is just like, you know, my earliest memories are of everyone wearing masks and gloves and like that's just, it's
I
so
think
fascinating to
it's
me.
very real too, and like people's like critical like relational development is happening in a time where everyone's wearing masks and you like can't actually get that facial feedback and that mirroring.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be really interesting both developmentally and like what fetishes people acquire to cope.
yeah, for sure. Hopefully there's gonna be some more eyebrow fetishists out in the world, because like I do,
Ooh,
it kills me that I can't like show them right now, but I do have very large luscious eyebrows,
beautiful
and
eyebrows.
I, we need more people who appreciate eyebrows in this.
Maybe
I will say
20
my,
years when
the
you're
giant, yes, yes, 20 years from now, hit me up. The clip that I just shot with the giantess, like he's also really into my eyebrows. So I have I have this thing. I just hold up the little car right in front of like, and this, it still allows me to obscure like half my face. And I just hold up the little car in front of my enormous eyebrows and like stare into it. Like so fun, so fun.
true. It's so, and it is like play. It's so playful, which I feel like a lot of people
Yeah.
don't do in their adult life.
Yeah, and honestly, like this job has ruined other jobs for me, which I think is great in a lot of ways. Like, I tried retiring, I was moving on to a different phase of my life, and I was like, no, just, you know, I can work an office job for a little while. And like, I feel like it was like, not to say that anyone loves sitting at a computer doing boring shit all day, but I feel like for me, it was especially hard because I was so used to doing just like the creativity and like intellectual curiosity of this. It's like now when I'm moving on, I spend a lot of time thinking about like, okay, well, what do I really want to do with my life? And I settled on social work because it has a lot of the same kind of psychological fascination for me. But it's like now I won't settle for something boring because I know I don't have to, you know?
Yeah, it does make other other forms of labor less interesting, often less profitable, and
Yeah.
boring.
So in that sense, like, I hope I'm always doing something as crazy and awesome as like yelling at a little man in a car.
I hope that for you too.
Thank you.
I was just, I want to talk about a little bit about the clip that I was shooting. I've been getting a request from someone who's really into like messy facial scenes, which is not something like I normally do. And so I was like really interested. He was like fairly persistent about it and very generous. And it was like, okay, like I will happily make you this clip, but it's definitely going to have like a dominant spin on it. And so
You're gonna do it your way.
yeah, I'm gonna do it my way. And like he loved it. And it was like this like mutual jerk off instructional scene, where Mistress of course comes first and encourages you to come all over her face, but only if you're gonna clean it off. And I think it's been like very fun for me taking, when I started doing, I like started off as a pro dom, I made some like fetish clips, and then I started doing more like BDSM porn for kink.com and other places. And I feel like there's this idea that like doms aren't penetrated, or like doms don't have sex, or like don't like X, Y, and Z, or that it is.
I have so many thoughts about that. Like, part of it, I think, is the desire of a lot of dominatrixes who are just like, I don't want to do that form of sex work, so I'm just going to say that this is not a thing that we do. But then because of like criminalization, people can't be clear about what their actual fucking boundaries are. And so like they create this myth of like, oh, well, we just know, I'll never touch a dick, I'll never do this. And like for some people that's true, and for other people it's like, are they just saying that because they have to? Which I hate that aspect.
Is like inside of someone up until their elbow, and they're like, I don't have sex.
Right. I mean, like, how do we define sex is another aspect of and how does the law define sex? Like, they don't give a fuck if like your fist is inside someone else or if their fist is inside you. Legally that is the same thing. Yeah. So and then there's the third thing, which is like, what does domination mean? And this makes me think about chastity guys, who this was another target of one of my rants, of like, who think like, oh, well, I'll do this for you because women hate having sex, and like, wouldn't the world be a better place if all men were in chastity? Like, who told you that? Like, this is your fetish. And maybe like, I don't want to have sex with you, but like the idea that like I don't want to have sex with anyone, like, who told you that?
Yeah.
Right. Like, of course you can be dominant and have sex.
Or that I think there's something too that's like very both like, it's like kind of homophobic that penetrative sex is inherently submissive. And I've been having a lot
misogynist.
Yeah. With the porn that I make, like turning that on its head and like unpacking that. And it's like, no, like I'm going to use you for my pleasure, and then we'll see what happens to you. And it's also, chastity like devices aren't something that I've actually played a lot with, like in my like 12 or 13 year career as a dom, because I'm like, if you can't not touch it just because I told you not to touch it, like we're not even on the same wavelength.
I like that. I will say chastity is not one of like my main interests, although I am into orgasm control. So of combining those things, like, yeah, I'd be into that. I don't do a lot of chastity just for like logistical reasons of like, if you get stuck and need me to come out at like 2 a.m. on a Tuesday to get that off your dick, like, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. You have to go to the hospital. And like but technology, God bless technology, is making this so much easier. Have you seen those like apps now? There's like chastity apps. Yeah. Where I'm like, okay.
Oof. Yeah.
What about hacking? Can you hack your chastity?
Some like vigilante incel who's unlocking all all consensual chastity devices.
Oh my God, that would be amazing. Or the opposite of someone who's just like, I don't want anyone to ever be able to take these off ever again.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yikes. Yeah, and during a pandemic, we don't want to be sending people to the hospital to get their chastity devices cut off. So
And I think I'm really interested in orgasm control too. And I think just like the way like my personal kink formed, I'm much more interested in orgasm control and like knowing that someone isn't touching themselves because I told them not to, not because they physically can't. And I think like I'm much more interested in like mental bondage or like predicaments than
mental bondage. I feel like is something that I've been getting a lot more into thanks to this virtual era of like, I can't tie you up, but like, why wouldn't you just lay there? Like just do what I tell you to
you want to do what I'm telling you to, right? So why would you even move? And I feel like there's like some like meditative hypno things that go really well.
Yeah.
I like pitting people up against their own desire where they're then choosing to do what I said over their desire to just come whenever they want to. Like that
yes,
is what's erotic.
That's the part where I'm like, tell me what you're into, because then I can I can force you to do things you're not into, but like where's the like that part of, and I get that could be appealing for some people of just brute force, like, okay, cool, that's not it for me. Yeah, I want to find that thing that you really want to do and use it against you.
Yes, in summary.
Yeah,
give us the information. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me about all of this kinky stuff. It's like been so nice to connect with people in this way, to talk about like the cool BDSM clips that we're making and to be able to like be in community with other workers when we can't.
This is such a brilliant idea. I love it so much. And I cannot wait to see you post it, and hopefully I will post it as well, and everyone will enjoy our brilliance. So.
Yes, beautiful. And where can people find you?
Excellent question. I try to direct everyone to one place just to keep things simple. During the pandemic, I found out that NewYorkCityDominatrix.com was only $18, so I purchased it and redirected everything there. So go to NewYorkCityDominatrix.com, and then you'll find links to my clip store, my fan site, my phone line, and I'm taking limited in-person appointments right now, and then hopefully when all this is over, we can see each other in person. And yeah, NewYorkCityDominatrix.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Lori Diletto. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.